Next category for my thoughts today, perhaps media and entertainment. During all the heavy rains, I've continued with my life of hibernation at the guest house and watching a lot of TV shows and movies, listening to podcasts. And one of the bigger things that I watched, and one of the things that really stuck out in my mind, was the German TV series Dark. And when I say that it really stuck in my mind, if you've seen the show, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is no ordinary TV show. It is quite good overall, but it is also very challenging. You don't just kick back and breeze through it like you would a season of Seinfeld. No, you are sitting down with a notebook, a pad of paper, and a pen, or a computer. You're drawing charts, you're writing down names, you're writing down dates, you're drawing lines connecting people, constantly trying to figure out who is who and who is related to who and what year is this and what are we talking about. And oh, puppies there hiding underneath the car. Now that I think about it, Dark fits in with the theme of my media of late because technically, I'm not giving anything away here, by the way. I'm not going to spoil anything because, if you know the show and if you've seen any of the trailers or you know anything about it at all, you do know that it involves time travel. I'm not, giving away anything there. Everyone knows that. But we have... it fits in with my discussions lately about movies about people stuck in time loops, like Groundhog Day movies. And this show is essentially the granddaddy of all time loop movies, because we're not just talking about one person stuck in a 24-hour loop. We're talking about basically nearly an entire world caught in a never-ending time loop with all the complexities of time travel you can imagine. So it's a very, very complicated show. Yeah, just to put it mildly.
Hello.
Hello, how are you? Look at that, planes in the air. There is an airport here in Mesot, and I guess I'm walking close to it. I thought it was much further away, but I guess it's just over there somewhere. That's actually a very nice sight for someone like me, because the whole idea of being, borders being closed and flights being canceled, it's almost like a rare occurrence to see an airplane up in the sky. But of course, here in Thailand, everything is open domestically. You can fly around the country and take buses and trains around the country. That's no problem. You just can't leave, or you can leave the country, sure, but then, then you can't come back in. Borders are closed on the outside, but travel is all possible, on the inside still. Getting back to Dark, I watched the first season already. I'd seen the first season of Dark, not when it first came out, but, shortly after it came out. So I knew the show, and season 2 and season 3 had come out. And I never got around to watching season 2, mainly because I was aware of just how complicated season 1 was and how hard it was to follow. And I just wasn't ready to dive into season 2. But with most shows today, there's a new breed of YouTube video available, which I find quite handy. Recaps. There are big recap channels out there. So if you're watching, season 4 of a show, you can go on these YouTube channels and watch a recap of season 3, where the YouTuber just summarizes everything that happened in season 3, just to remind you and, get you up to speed so that when you start watching season 4, you're not lost. You know what's going on, and you've sort of got the mood of the show back. So I'll often watch these recaps when I'm watching a new season of a show. Instead of rewatching the entire series or the previous season, I'll watch the recap, and then I'm, oh, now I remember what happened, and then I'm ready for the next season. But Dark, Dark is a completely different animal. I watched the recap of season 1, and by the end of the recap, I had no idea what was going on. I mean, the recap was so confusing. I was more confused after the recap than I was before I started watching it. So I watched a second recap and then a third recap, and after the end of the third one, I still really had no idea what was going on, and I didn't feel ready to dive into season 2. So, I bit the bullet and I just started watching Dark from the very beginning. I started with episode 1 of season 1 and watched the entire first season all over again before going on to season 2. And I did exactly what I described. I sat down with a notebook and a pen, and I had a phone open, and I just kept copious notes about everything that is going on. And I ended up watching episode 1, I think, 2 or 3 times, just because I found it so difficult to figure out who was who and what was going on in terms of the plot. I suppose you could just lose yourself in the atmosphere of it. It's a very atmospheric show. It's very cinematic, very beautiful, well shot. The acting is good. The music is amazing. So you could lose yourself in all of that and just forget about the plot and don't worry about the details. And you'd probably still enjoy it very much. But if you really want to know what's going on, as I said, you got to take notes and you really have to pay attention. Just now, as I was walking along, came across this interesting little neighborhood. Got kind of a drainage canal here and an open field, and then a nice tree behind me. I was watching some boys there who have made a makeshift ladder, so they can climb up into the tree, and they're up there in the branches. Just reminds me of my own childhood. So as soon as you get out into the countryside a little bit, outside of the city, you get into a little bit more of an adventurous life for the kids. They're out here riding their bikes and climbing trees, and I see them here in the water, kind of fishing and looking for turtles and frogs and that sort of thing. And I spotted this street on the other side of this small creek, and I'm just going to walk down that street just to take a look around. Whew, starting to sweat a little bit. But down this street there are these little houses that I see a lot of here in Mesot, and I'm kind of curious about them. It's like almost like a row of what from the outside you would think were garages for cars, like a row of car garages, but they are actually dwellings, they're homes, and very, very simple dwellings, I think, very small and self-contained units, and you just see like a single building in a long line, and it's divided up into these little garages basically. And I've always been curious about them, and I'm curious how much it costs to rent one of these. I've never been inside one, and I've never spoken to anyone who lives in one. I'm just going to walk down this street, and off to my left you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. I have to be careful going across this creek. I'll show you the bridge I've got. So there's my bridge. I think normally I'd have no trouble at all, but somehow when I'm carrying a camera, everything in life becomes 10 times more difficult, and I lose my words and lose my balance and everything else. It's one of the risks of walking around with a camera. Anyway, there on the left you can see the little houses that I'm talking about. I see these things all over the place, and there's no like front door the way we think of them. The whole thing just opens up, and little house in there. And it really stands out now because again you see so much of the laundry hanging outside because of the sunny weather. So here I am walking down this little street. Yeah, a lot of the doors are open there, and you can see inside. Yeah, very simple but comfortable place to live. They have mattresses on the floor, and the people inside are either sitting on the mattress or sitting on the floor, and So not a lot of, furniture. There's no living room sets or anything like in there. There isn't enough room for that. Just enough room to, be in there with the family and have a place to sleep. I don't know whether they have bathrooms inside and running water and that kind of thing. I have no idea. Curious where this road is going to take me. Yeah, I think it's just going to dead end in a field and I'll have to turn around again. Dead end. No, unless I really want to get adventurous and walk through there. And no need to do that today. But here's another set of these houses I was talking about. Just very simple little apartments, I guess, all in a row. Again, I'm very curious what the rent would be for one of these places. When I say I'm curious about the rent, I'm not saying I want to move into one of these places. I'm content at the guest house. But I'm just thinking for local families or local people, what it costs to live in one of these places. And there it is again, the place I was looking at the beginning. And speaking of social life, I have had kind of a social life of late, but it has all been online because I found with the isolation of all the lockdowns and quarantines, people are spending more time at home and they seem to be reaching out to people more often. And I'm doing that as well. So I've reconnected with quite a few people from my past. And I recently joined a WhatsApp group that consists of members of an India-Canada exchange program that I went on when I was in university. And I had no idea this group existed until about a month ago. So I've been busy chatting with all these people about our experiences from a long time ago. Oh, going across my bridge again. Don't want to fall in. But one thing I learned is that a lot of the members of the exchange program from India, they ended up living overseas. So my counterpart from the program is now living in Florida. Someone else, living in the UK. Well, there's several living in the United States and in the UK. And one of them is actually living here in Thailand now with her husband and children. So that's quite interesting. And one of the members said that, moving to the UK and living there was an economics decision, to move there to have a better chance at making more money and living a better life. But the problem for a lot of them is they pay the price in terms of a social life. Because in the West, of course, we do tend to live a bit more of an isolated life inside our homes. And the reason I'm thinking of this is because as I was walking by those little row houses back there, they're not the most expensive or luxurious dwellings, and you can think of them that way. But there's also advantages to living like that, because I've lived like that myself quite often in similar situations. And the thing is, your door is open all the time and your neighbors are right there, and you end up just spending so much more time hanging out with friends and neighbors because your life is much more out in the open. So even though it's not as comfortable a life, as living in a nice big house with a fence and a gate, in a way it can be a better life because it's just more social. Anyway, that thought popped into my head just now. If the nature or quality of the audio suddenly got a bit better or worse, by the way, it's because I had to switch microphones. My wireless microphone battery died, and I'm now using a wired lavalier mic, and I have it hooked actually to my reading glasses hanging around my neck. So I'm a little bit lost. I'm not, sometimes my cell phone doesn't have a good enough satellite connection, so the GPS isn't always working. So I'm not quite sure where I am, but I'm going to continue along here, skipping over puddles and see where I end up. Getting back to Dark, I won't review the whole show because there are lots of very good reviews online on YouTube, much better reviews than I could give. You know, the short answer is that, yeah, it's a very good show, but it's very challenging, and you have to work pretty hard to get a lot out of it in terms of understanding what's going on. It does not spoon feed you the plot or the details. But I can give perhaps my own unique perspective on it. And one is, it reminded me a little bit of a Stephen King novel, but in a good way, because a Stephen King novel for me always has had two basic foundations. You've got the horror, you know, you've got a monster in the story, whether it's a rabid dog, a vampire, any kind of monster you could name, and the monster is killing people and people are fighting the monster. That's the plot of the story, you know, that you see in the, you know, the movie and the book It, you know, the killer clown in It, which yeah, that's the monster, and they fight the monster, and that's the story. But running alongside that plot is kind of the more interesting side of the story, is that Stephen King uses that plot device, like that plot almost as a device to show you the seedy underbelly of life in a small town. The secrets of all the people living there. You know, on the surface, you see, you know, normal, regular people, you know, happy with their family and in their marriages and in their careers. But as the Stephen King novel goes along, and as Dark goes along, you slowly peel away the onion layers and uncover all the secrets of all the people living in this town. You know, the affairs, the corruption, the crimes, the drug dealing, or anything else you might want to name. All of that is going on under the surface, and that, and, you know, involves the relationships between the people, between the characters, and that can be a very interesting story, just as, or even more interesting than the main plot, be it about a monster for Stephen King or time travel for Dark. We might be getting to the point of the mad dogs and Englishmen expression, because that sun is really beating down, getting quite hot. Local people are sitting comfortably in lawn chairs in the shade. It's only strange individuals like me out walking around on these bare streets in the hottest part of the day. But that is what I do. It is that is one of my habits. But yeah, Dark, as I said, is a very difficult show to understand. Hey there, cow. Check out my my buddy at the side of the road. See if he wants to say hello. Look at the flies on him. Yeah. It's one thing I can't help but think about every time I see one of these guys. Put that many flies on me, and I'm going out of my mind, right? I couldn't stand it. Flies and mosquitoes drive me insane, and these poor animals just get covered in these biting flies. And I wonder how they manage to live through even a single day. But I don't know, maybe they have tougher skin than I have, and maybe they kind of get used to it. Yeah, I'm really getting out into the countryside now. I've got some farmers' fields over there that looks like a field of rice. Oh, this poor guy, he's limping. So even out here in the countryside, he gets run over by scooters and cars. So I'm going to continue for a little while longer out here into the countryside, because this is such a beautiful area. Look at that. I guess the GoPro gives a wide angle view, so maybe it's not quite as dramatic as what I see, but yeah, it's a very beautiful setting with the rice fields and the mountains in the background. Yeah, it looks like those mountains are no joke. You know, from this angle they're a lot taller than I imagined they were. And I hear another plane coming from the airport. Ah, the outside world. One thing about dark that can be very frustrating, but in a funny way, and it relates to how difficult the storyline is that as a viewer, you see so many opportunities for the characters to clear things up. But as you watch more and more episodes of the show, you run into the situation constantly where nobody ever answers a question, ever. Because the characters themselves are as confused as we are, and they're constantly running into people and wondering who they are, and they keep asking them who they are or what happened. There's always some kind of question, like, who are you? And the person will just sort of look off into space and give some long quote from Shakespeare or from the Bible or from Nietzsche or from some poem, and just sort of ramble on about space and time, and the end is the same as the beginning, and the future is the past embedded in the present, and on and on and on. And they could clear up the whole mystery if they just answered the question. You know, it's like, who are you? It's like, oh, I am your grandfather, but I'm from the future and I've come back in time. But no one ever says that. You know, it's like, who are you? Oh, I'm actually your mother, but I'm from another time period and I came here 2 days ago. You know, they never actually explain who they are and where they came from and what they're doing. You know, so over and over and over again, you get some character saying, what just happened? And then the other guy will just sort of look off into the distance and give this, 5-minute philosophical account of the nature of existence. And you're like, well, that's great, but what happened? You know, like, can you just break it down for me? And of course, no character ever does. And the mysteries just go on and on and on and on until you just about lose your mind. There's some of my buddies, and they found a local garbage dump to keep them happy. I just spotted all these dogs at the last second, and I was a bit worried they would take exception to my presence, but they seem content to leave me alone as long as they can get out this garbage and find something to eat. I've often wondered if someone has done a study of these kinds of informal garbage dumps, because I'm pretty sure I know what happens. You know, it's human nature that there can be a pristine riverside or a pristine green field, and it can be that way forever. But as soon as one person tosses a bag of garbage there, then boom, everybody throws garbage there. You know, it's like that first person can break the static nature of what's going on. You know, it's like nobody will throw garbage here forever, but then the one person does it, and suddenly you see garbage there, and it's like, oh, I guess it's okay. And then everybody starts throwing garbage there. And then once that happens, it ends up being a garbage dump forever and ever. You just have to prevent that one person from throwing that first bag. You'd be okay. But once that first bag goes out there, you've pretty much already lost the battle. I think there's a theory about that. I forget the name of it. I heard it in a podcast long ago. It's sort of about abandoned buildings and how they will remain untouched for a long, long time. But as soon as some kid smashes one window, that one broken window will just open a floodgate of vandalism, and then the whole building will quickly be destroyed. But as long as nobody breaks that first window, it's usually okay. But once that first domino falls, then it opens the floodgates. Apparently, my internal compass is completely turned around, because I'm looking at my maps, and everything the map is telling me it just feels wrong. It's telling me I'm heading in a certain direction and I need to go here and turn right, turn left. But I feel like I should be heading in the exact opposite direction. But I am going to believe my maps and my phone, and anyway, I'm turning around from the countryside basically and moving back into town. And I think I've been out in my vitamin D sunshine long enough for today. One thing about dark, I think it needed some humor, because there is one joke in the show, and I won't spoil it, and it's kind of an ongoing joke. And yet it's never ever, there's no payout to the joke. It's just sort of an ongoing joke, and you never actually get the punchline. But there is one kind of funny joke that goes on all the time. But beyond that, no one in this show has a sense of humor. I mean, it is dour. Everyone is sad. Everyone is depressed. Nobody is talking to anybody else. It's just a brutal, sad, depressing atmosphere. And it never seems to stop raining sometimes. It's like, does it ever not rain in this town? You know, it just seems like a very depressing place. And I feel like the show could use a little bit of humor, especially when some of the characters, you know, the situations they're in terms of the time travel and the situations they encounter, that, you know, they just blow the mind of a normal person. And you're trying to get out of one situation because of all this time travel nonsense, and then you end up in another one, and it's worse than where you were. And you think a guy at some point would just go, "Oh, come on, give me a break. You know, this is insane." You know, something of the humor of the situation would eventually come through. But not in the show. Nobody ever has a sense of humor about anything. So it's pretty dour and dark and depressing. So I guess maybe that explains the title of the show. So don't expect a lot of big laughs if you settle in to watch Dark. Man, what a community of dogs I've come across. Got all these guys behind me, and then more of them down there, and then a bunch ahead of me there. Yeah, another little garbage dump there. Oh, I got another one running across the rice fields to join his friends. They probably have quite a few health problems, these poor dogs. But, you know, from the outside they look kind of happy and content to be out here in the wild. You know, they're running in and out of the water and things. But it's got to be a tough life, fending for themselves. The other thing I'll say about Dark, kind of a critical point of view, I guess, is that considering the stakes that are laid out in the show and the scale of everything that's going on and the build-up to solving the mystery, the payoff at the very end, you know, if you manage to hang in there all the way to the end of season 3, for me, it's not enough. I mean, there is an answer, you know, you get a very clear answer, but to my mind, it doesn't explain everything that was going on, and it's a little bit of a letdown for me. You know, I wanted more. And shows like that are a little bit of a frustration for me, a little bit of a pet peeve. There's a show I watched long ago called Leftovers. It was similar in a way because Leftovers had an incredible story, you know, with a huge mystery that they were building up forever. And all these crazy things happen in Leftover, you know, all these wild and weird things. And you kind of really enjoy them because you're assuming, well, at some point the show is going to explain what all of this stuff meant. And then you get to the end of the show, and no, they never explain any of it. It's all just left a complete mystery. And it turns out that all that weird and wild and amazing stuff going on earlier in the show, they just threw it in there because it looked cool and it sounded cool and it looked weird. They just made stuff up, and in the end it didn't mean anything at all, you know. And that's kind of a Damon Lindelof specialty, I find. Very similar to the show Lost, you know, where people were kind of disappointed in the ending because it didn't live up to the big build-up and never really answered any of the questions. It's kind of a cop-out ending. And Dark, it doesn't have a cop-out ending, don't get me wrong. It actually does have a real ending and a, you know, an explanation for the mystery. They tie up all the loose ends, but I still felt like, nah, it wasn't enough. I was expecting more, you know, something more dramatic. And in a way, the ending sidestepped everything that was going on. It kind of came out of left field. So I wasn't that happy with that. But Anyway, that was my experience of the German TV show Dark. There are 3 seasons of Dark available right now. And look at this group here. I think all that honking was their way of telling me, come on, buddy, leave us alone. Take your GoPro and keep walking. Yeah, they're settling down now, back where they were. So I'm backtracking, as I said, heading back into Mesot now. Take me a little while though, because I feel like I've walked quite far. And perhaps the next category in my thoughts, I'll do a complete 180 on everything I've been talking about. I've got some other media stuff to talk about, like movies, TV shows, podcasts. But the thing that popped into my head was MMA, mixed martial arts. It's the only sport that I follow, that I'm interested in. And it's kind of hard to explain why I like it, but I do. And I watch, the UFC is the biggest organization in the United States. And there's also Bellator there. I watch the Bellator events. And then here in Asia, the main promotion is called One Championship, based in Singapore. And they recently had an event called No Surrender here in Bangkok. And all of these events are quite interesting because in the current situation, there is no audience. So now you have only the fighters, the referees, the judges, and then the corner personnel, the broadcast people. There is no crowd watching and cheering or anything like that. So it changes the dynamics of the event quite a bit. So far, it hasn't bothered me. One interesting thing is that because there is no cheering audience, you can hear everything. So every punch, every kick, you really hear it clearly. And then when the coaches are shouting out instructions to their fighter, you can hear exactly what they're saying. And then you get some really interesting dynamics too, because the broadcast people get very excited, when they're talking into their microphone and they shout things out. They say, this fighter, he has this weakness and he's doing that wrong. But the other fighter can hear what he's saying. And he's like, oh, thank you, thanks for the tip. And then he'll use whatever the broadcaster was shouting out, to try and attack the guy, take advantage of this weakness, that the broadcaster pointed out. And there was even one time when one guy was losing the fight pretty badly, and the other guy kind of kept punching him in the face over and over again. And people were thinking that maybe the referee should stop the fight because the guy was getting hurt, but the referee was letting the fight continue. And then one of the broadcasters, felt so strongly about it that he actually, shouted as part of the broadcast, stop the fight, stop the fight. And because there's no audience, the referee could hear him shouting this, and he didn't know who was shouting it. Maybe it was one of the coaches or cornermen, trying to protect his fighter and telling the referee to stop the fight. He didn't know who was shouting this out. And so it led to, they had to adjust their systems quite a bit to adjust to this no audience, perfectly quiet environment for watching these fights and refereeing them and judging them. It affected the nature of the whole event. I imagine this topic isn't of much general interest, but as I said, it is something that I'm thinking about, so I'll babble on about it a little bit more. One big difference between One Championship here in Asia and the UFC is that the UFC is pretty much all about MMA. That's all they do. All their fighters are MMA fighters and the matches are MMA matches. But One Championship, because it's here in Asia where Muay Thai is much more prevalent than in North America, they have Muay Thai fights, they have kickboxing fights, and then they have pure MMA fights. I have to say though that when it comes to MMA, I often prefer One Championship over the UFC, particularly when it comes to the rules and to judging. One Championship has a much simpler system that I appreciate, where, for one thing, most blows are legal. You can pretty much do anything you want other than, the obvious. You can't deliberately jam your fingers in someone's eyes. You can't do groin strikes. You can't do I think a soccer ball kick to the head of a downed opponent. You can't do that because that's quite a dangerous blow. It could really hurt someone. But beyond that, it is a fight. That's the whole point of MMA for me. It's basically, put two guys in a ring and fight. Use any technique you want, punches, elbows, knees, arm bars, knee bars, anything to win the fight. And I enjoy the purity of that. The UFC, over the years, because of this safety mantra that goes on in North America, they keep putting in place more and more rules. It's like, okay, you can elbow someone, but you can't do a 9-to-6 elbow. So you can do an elbow from the side, but you can't bring your elbow straight down. You can hit him this way, but you can't hit him that way. You can do this, but you can't do that. And it just kind of, for me, reduces the purity of the sport as a fighting sport. And it also gets really confusing. Half the time you don't know what you're allowed to do and what you're not. And One Championship has a different scoring system for MMA. In fact, they have no scoring system at all. All they do is announce who won. That's it. They judge the entire fight as one unit. So they might fight for 3 rounds or 5 rounds, whatever it is, but they don't score round by round. They judge the entire fight and then come to a conclusion, if they have to make a decision, and they say, you are the winner. And that's pretty much it. And most of the time, all the time in my opinion, they get it right. You can tell, usually, even if you don't know the rules of the sport, you see two guys fighting, and by the end of the fight, you've got a pretty clear opinion in your head. It's like, who won that fight? And with One Championship, they always say the guy won who really did win. But UFC has the 10-point must system, so they score it round by round. And that often leads to quite weird judging, and it's often, surprisingly often, someone will win a fight in the UFC that everybody disagrees with. The judges say, Bill won the fight. And then everyone in the audience is surprised. Like, Bill? I thought the other guy won. Because of the judging system, it often goes against what we see as spectators, Yeah, there's some weird, plus it can lead to some momentum changes. So if you have a 3-round fight with a 10-point must system, if I win rounds 1 and 2, unless you knock me out, I pretty much won the fight. Like, whatever happens in round 3, assuming it's a regular 10-9 round, if you win the 3rd round, it doesn't make any difference. I still win because I win 2 rounds out of 3. So you do get this weird thing where if I win the first 2 rounds, I might just coast for round number 3 and try not to get knocked out because I know I'm going to win the fight no matter what. But in One Championship, it doesn't work that way. I can win the first 2 rounds, but if the other guy has a big performance in round 3, they might give the fight to him because he's coming on strong and he impresses them. And so basically, in One Championship, you have to fight as hard as you can all the time to make sure you get the win. And in the UFC, it's quite a bit more complicated than that. So I kind of prefer One Championship for MMA judging and MMA rules. Back on a busy road and back in familiar territory, heading back into Mesot. It turns out that the maps were wrong. I was right. My internal compass of where I was wrong. My position on Google Maps and maps.me, that was correct, but it had my direction wrong on both of them. It kept saying I was pointed in one direction when it turns out I wasn't pointed in that direction at all. So I don't know what happened there. The satellites got confused or something. Anyway, I had to eventually listen to my own sense of which direction to take, and yeah, I was right, and for this time technology was wrong for some reason. Yeah, I've watched quite a bit of UFC lately. They had this big event for a while, a series of events that they called Fight Island. And that was quite funny because, you know, because of the situation around the world, they weren't allowed to hold any events in the United States. So, you know, Dana White, the head of the UFC, was coming up with all these ideas where they could still hold fights in some international place where the rules don't apply or something. And people were speculating where this could be, imagining that they'd have a big barge out in the ocean, you know, like a pirate ship or something, and then they would fight out in international waters, all these romantic ideas. And he eventually announced that they were going to fight on an island, and they called it Fight Island. And that really fired up everybody's imagination, picturing something like Lord of the Flies, or Tom Hanks in Castaway, sending all these fighters to this small island, tropical island, in the middle of the ocean, some Polynesian island or something with nobody living on it. And they would build an octagon in the middle of the jungle. And it was all very exciting and then very romantic. And then when they finally announced where Fight Island was, well, it was, for me, quite a disappointment, of course. Turns out that Fight Island was Yas Island in Dubai. And it really isn't an island at all. It's really just a piece of land that is separated from the mainland by a river, right? So technically, according to the rules of geography, yeah, it is an island, but it definitely did not live up to the romantic imagery of Fight Island. So anyway, that's where all the events took place, on Yas Island in Dubai. And after that, they moved back to the United States, and they've been holding all of their fights at the UFC Performance Institute in Las Vegas now. And the biggest fight recently was between Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic, and that was for the heavyweight championship. It was part of it was the end of a trilogy for Daniel Cormier and Stipe, where Cormier won the first fight, became the heavyweight champion. Stipe won the second fight, and he reclaimed the heavyweight championship. And his third fight was again for the heavyweight championship, and it was kind of like a 2 out of 3 to, you know, establish once and for all who is the better heavyweight fighter. And everything was leading up to that big heavyweight championship match. If there are any MMA fans out there and you're curious about my take on the heavyweight fight, I have to say that I was quite disappointed in it, for a couple of reasons. You know, Daniel Cormier, he's a great fighter, but he's really known for being a dominant wrestler. You know, he went to the Olympics twice as a wrestler, and that's one of his big advantages over other fighters. And even going into the first Stipe Miocic fight, everyone assumed Cormier was going to wrestle him, take him to the ground, and dominate him that way. And yet, out of nowhere, Cormier knocked him out with a right hand, got in close, kind of a really close in right hook, and knocked Stipe off his feet and then finished him on the ground. So that seemed to be a very good weapon for Cormier. And in this third, and then in the second fight, Cormier did a lot of stand-up. Like, he was boxing almost the whole time. And he didn't use his wrestling very much. And that was a big disappointment. And a lot of people say that's the main reason he lost the fight was because he didn't rely on his wrestling. So everybody going into fight number 3 was saying, okay, this time Daniel Cormier is going to come out, he's going to use his wrestling, and he's going to dominate Stipe because of that. And then in this fight, he didn't wrestle again. Which may not have been a bad strategy, to be honest, because Cormier landed that same right hand over and over and over again. He did remarkably well. I mean, he hit Stipe on the chin with that right hand a lot of times. And any one of those, had it landed a little bit different, probably could have knocked him out again. So my sense is that Cormier in the fight was like, man, this guy, he's open to this right hand, and I'm going to keep hitting him with it. And one of these times he's going to go down. But the fight went on, and Stipe never went down, and he ended up winning the fight by decision. And everybody went on and on and on about how Stipe is now the greatest heavyweight of all time, and how he totally dominated Daniel Cormier, and yet I didn't see that way at all. I'm no MMA judge, but I almost would have given the fight to Cormier just based on the damage that he did and the punches that he landed, and I didn't really see Stipe do that much. So I'm not quite sure what was so great about his performance so that he won the fight. But I was very disappointed that Cormier, again, did not use his wrestling. Because in my mind, this trilogy fight was supposed to determine once and for all which one of them is the better fighter. But to me, it still didn't answer that question, because Cormier didn't use his biggest weapon, his wrestling. So it proved that, Cormier, this time, he couldn't knock Stipe out, but maybe had he used his wrestling, he would have won the fight. We will never know, because he never used his wrestling in any of the 3 fights of the trilogy. So I found it a little bit disappointing, the whole trilogy, the end of the trilogy of Cormier and Miocic. I have a million other thoughts rolling around in my head, but I think I'll set them aside for now. I'm back in pretty much downtown Mesa and getting quite close to my guest house. So I think I will save any more thoughts for another video to come in the next few days, as I try to figure out what to do next here in Thailand. And for that, I will end things here. And as always, I will see you in the next video. And hopefully I don't get hit by a car here. One last thought popped into my head about the differences between one championship and the UFC. Again, from a spectator point of view. And I know some people love this guy. He's kind of a love him or hate him kind of announcer. But the main play-by-play announcer for one championship is an Australian. I think his name is Mike Schiavello. And I cannot stand him. I cannot listen to him. He's got this high-pitched, over-the-top, excited tone that never changes. It just goes on and on and on and on until it just drives me mad. And I guess he's well known for making all these funny jokes and quips, and but I never hear any of them. And just the tone of the way he speaks just drives me crazy. I cannot listen to him. So when I watch one championship, I just turn the volume off. I don't have the audio on at all. I just watch the fights, without sound, because I can't bear to listen to his voice, And really, there's nothing against the guy. I mean, he's obviously a very famous play-by-play announcer. He's well known in Australia, and everybody loves him and thinks he's the greatest thing ever. So hey, more power to you, keep doing what you're doing. A lot of people love it, but I'm in that small minority, I guess, that just cannot bear it. So yeah, for one championship for me, I enjoy it quite a bit, but I listen with the audio all the way off. Sorry, Mike.